Welcome to Counterspin, your weekly look behind the headlines of the mainstream news. I'm Janine Jackson. Here we go again. Or is there something new in the Justice Department's securing of guilty pleas from 5 of the world's biggest banks on felony charges, including price rigging? Good luck sussing it out from corporate media. Having read a number of stories, the takeaway would seem to be that this is a very significant development that means absolutely nothing. Since no one is suggesting that the fines that these banks may eventually pay some part of will really change their behavior going forward, why don't we read more about other ways we could respond to criminal activity on this scale by actors this powerful? Bartlett Naylor is financial policy advocate at the group Public Citizen. He's also a former chief of investigations at the U.S. Senate Banking Committee. He joins us now by phone from Washington, D.C. Welcome to Counterspin, Bartlett Naylor.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Attorney General Loretta Lynch referred to brazenly illegal behavior engaged in on a near daily basis. What did Citicorp, J.P. Morgan Chase, Barclays, and Royal Bank of Scotland, and then I know UBS was slightly different, their charges, but what did they plead guilty to?
Officially, they pled guilty to violations of the Sherman Antitrust Act. In practice, traders from these banks communicated with each other in chat rooms and organizations they themselves described colorfully in terms such as the Mafia or the cartel, where they agreed to fix prices. It's a classic thing. You're trying to buy a contract and you decide, okay, let's all put in a certain bid or let's not underbid each other. In this case, they are manipulating the world's foreign exchange market, which has about a volume of $5 trillion a day, to advantage each one of them and their banks.
Well, we hear that this ruling is a significant first because there were guilty pleas, for one thing, and then because the pleas came from the bank's holding companies and not from subsidiaries, and then also because this deal involved tearing up an existing non-prosecution agreement, which shows that the DOJ is willing to do that. But then at the same time, the New York Times had a story with the lead that life at the banks will go on without much of a hiccup. So how significant is this ruling?
Yes, well, it's magnificently insignificant. You're correct that we've made an important stride in deciding that banks can be prosecuted and found criminally guilty. Apparently, we thought after Enron, with the criminal prosecution of Arthur Andersen, its accounting firm, that one could not do that without sending financial tsunamis or causing collateral damage that was not worth the criminal charge. And we went through a decade of using what's known as a deferred prosecution agreement. These were these closed-door settlements. Well, now we have come to the point that we can actually stick the word criminal guilt onto a company, and the collateral consequences will not be severe. But that is itself a problem because, as you also, I think, correctly observed, there should be actual harm, actual punishment that is hurtful to the company, and it's clear that the prosecutors took a great deal of care to make sure that this was in effect a pain-free guilty plea. The business will continue. The fines are essentially paid by shareholders. No actual individuals will be spending nights in beds other than their own.
Well, here's what bugs me about media coverage of all this. The New York Times on May 21st starts a story. Even as 5 big banks plead guilty to felonies and pay out billions of dollars, the question remains whether top executives will shrug off the penalties as just an average cost of doing business. We'll set aside the word average. It's not, of course, average, but I just don't think that is the question that remains. I think that question is pretty much answered. I mean, shouldn't we be moving the conversation on to, if the prize that our eyes are on is deterrence, what would it take to make these banks alter their behavior?
That's right. And I think the answer is that individual bankers, especially managers who are responsible, if not co-conspirators in these crimes, need to go to jail. There need to be conspicuous so-called perp walks. In the 1980s, more than 1,000 executives with savings and loan took that perp walk and went to jail. The most notorious, of course, was Charles Keating. And as you, I think, rightly say, that has a deterrent effect. We have an enormous culture problem, ethics problem on Wall Street that is macroeconomic in scale. We have the New York Federal Reserve President William Dudley saying there's a serious problem of lack of ethics. We have bankers in polls, 40% of them say they believe they have to cheat to stay competitive. In fact, from this particular FX case, we have the new bumper sticker for Wall Street. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. In other words, you have to cheat to compete. And unless the cheaters are really going to pay by going to prison, not only will it be an invitation to cheat, it will be a mandate to cheat because you can't compete with somebody who is cheating. They have that advantage over you.
Media often kind of disparage those of us who call for prison terms as being kind of bloodthirsty or stupid. But I think besides this question of deterrence, I think there's also a simple curiosity with these rulings like we have this past week from the DOJ about how we can say that crimes were committed, but nobody committed them.
Right, these immaculately conceived crimes. In fact, if you read the DOJ's 13-page complaint against J.P. Morgan, they have a traitor. They don't name him, I'm guessing it's a him. When J.P. Morgan applies for its waiver, they say this is due to a single rogue trader. I'm not sure I believe that. Presumably that rogue trader had supervisors that may have gotten a whiff of this, especially since it's went on each and every day for 7 years, and this guy was a leading trader. Let us bring that person to trial. Presumably, he might talk about his superiors, as is one of the city court traders who's on trial as we speak in London. In that case, it was LIBOR manipulation. He says his bosses knew full well what was going on.
Well, what finally is the state of legislative reform efforts as another possible inroad towards making actual change here?
Legislation, we think, is necessary. Transparency, the Justice Department in these cases should tell us exactly what the nature of the scope of the crime. They say it was big, but we still don't know how big it was. Ideally, this would come out in a trial where the Justice Department would be forced to lay out its case and the bankers would have a chance to defend. The concern about these deals, whether they are deferred prosecution agreements or even guilty pleas, is that a lot of these details are swept under the rug. We really don't have a full airing of the problem. But we suffer the 114th Congress split government in Washington where no legislation of any significance is going to pass, and certainly not one where you have deeply pocketed banks who are a major source of campaign contributions to both parties. We don't see needed legislation clearing this Congress, however important it may be.
All right, then we've been speaking with Bartlett Naylor. He's from the group Public Citizen. You can find their work online at citizen.org. Thank you very much, Bartlett Naylor, for joining us this week on Counterspin.
Thank you.